Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the Changing Hearts and Minds series. I'm Ellza of Blue Monarch Group, and today I have a very good friend of mine here today, Yangbo from INNOVO. He's the Chief Partnership Officer. Hi, Yangbo. How are you?
Very well.
Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I'm really excited to talk about this special topic that you and I are doing a little bit of a series on. And today's topic is really around the concept of blue zones and whether or not they can be manually replicated. And part of this discussion is that blue zones have several elements that offer the environment and, frankly, the enablement for humans to be able to create that ecosystem and move past that environment. And for those of you that are not aware of blue zones, it is basically a large population or a high concentration of centurions in that particular city or region. I believe currently there are 6 of them all across the world. And the concept is if we can replicate those through sustainable and human behavior elements, then we can all live a much more prosperous and healthy and frankly longer life. So Yangbo, I want to first talk about, the concept of blue zones and how sustainability fits into that picture. I'd love to know your take on the key elements that are required and how the environment plays a key role in that formulation process.
Indeed. First, your most critical element, at least on the foundational level, is elimination of pollution. So what we aim at with INNOVO is enabling communities to not only decarbonize, but also achieve a circular economy, which effectively means you're eliminating the need to landfill or incinerate refuse, thus eliminating that flow of pollutants. And moreover, we do it in a way that is profitable so that you can then be able to reinvest proceeds back into community infrastructure, whatever the priorities are. It could be additional environmental improvements, it could be improving the public realm, or any of that really enhances the community's capability of becoming a blue zone.
And that makes a lot of sense because you and I have both read the Planetary Health Check report that was released in September around everything from ocean acidity to air quality and how that impacts the quality of life and frankly the ability for you to continue to live a life in a particular region that doesn't meet those. So of those 9 elements, we have everything from just moving naturally or having a purpose and creating that downshift. But I think the bigger thing is not only do you, to our point, you have to have the physical environment with those resources. And in order for you to actually create an enablement process, it's very much Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think, in these kind of models, is you have to have the basics to get to a higher tier of growth. Now, at BMG, we mostly focus on the enablement side, right? Like, can we have programs that drive people to find their sense of purpose or reduce stress or encourage a better nutrition plan? But that only works if there is a sufficient amount of resources available on a long-term basis for that. So one of the biggest ones is, regular physical activity. And to your point, if the air quality is not good, more and more people are going to stay indoors than they're going to stay outdoors. So now we've limited that natural physical activity that would happen with a Friday afternoon walk or a post-lunch stroll around the neighborhood that would come in. And the only way that this really works is if it's embedded into a lifestyle as opposed to a conscious plan that can be going to. I want to talk about waste management because I think that's also a big deterrent when we think about longevity as a whole. When more and more places around us are filled with waste, it limits the areas that we can move around in. And I'm in Chicago, so I'll speak to sometimes we're having some, development issues because of the not even the proximity to waste, but the odors that sometimes transpire, on a rainy day or what have you. Tell me a little bit more about some of the technologies that INNOVO has when it comes to building those that are not necessarily, the air or the water, but even just the physical space that some of our traditional infrastructure tools use versus some more sustainability led technologies.
Yes. The ultimate goal here is to be able to reclaim space that is currently occupied by refuse. So whether it's landfilling or if we're talking about air quality incineration, reclaim that. So instead of these flows of refuse, that you actually turn these into streams of products that in fact generate income when they're part of circular supply chains. So examples would be, and it's becoming increasingly widely known, is a process, and we're agnostic to technologies. We work with a wide range of vendors on this, but the basic principle is pyrolysis, that you take compounds, like any type of material, and in a minimal oxygen environment, you heat it. It could be a number of ways. It could be just high temperature, direct. It could be microwave assisted, any number of ways. And then through that heating, you break down these materials into its constituent molecules. So effectively, this means that now you're going to be able to recycle any type of refuse, or at least a much wider range than what can be mechanically recycled.
Right. So now that we like in theory, if we have the technologies and and those that have been vetted and by INNOVO that are capable of doing it on an industrial level rather than a local or a small scale. This can be done on a large scale. We now have not only physically more space that we can work with, but we also have the ability to organize the space, whether that be a municipality or a county or what have you, to say this is probably the best way for people to engage in that environment, both physically and culturally and socially. So that way we can increase longevity for those existing populations, both in their lifespan and their health span. And part of that is if the space is available, we can design it however we want. And part of the designing on a human behavior level is figuring out anthropologically, how do people currently operate? What is the closest knee-jerk reaction? Because it's much easier, and this is one that the three lefts method that BMG uses is it's far easier to get people to move three lefts than it is one hard right if they don't want to do their right. So if we have the space, we have a lot more opportunity to play around with, and we've already kind of started to put some of those enabler elements together: cleaner air, better access to high quality water, and just more opportunities. So rather than putting a new landfill in a new location, we now have opportunity to turn it into maybe an urban center or a community hub of sorts that can be engaged
Or even just
across.
preserving it as just open space, so just
Or
leaving
open
it.
space,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So it allows that, and I think that sense of belonging in the community that can transcend across generations, because sense of belonging and purpose are one of the two hardest in those nine elements to actually replicate. It's a much more interstitial social phenomenon for it. And then let's think about it. If you're able to create the environment and then you can use human behavior and human design into the process, let's talk about how much that impacts society, right? There's less cost on the healthcare systems because people are just inherently healthier. There's more spend from an economic development standpoint because Healthier people move around, healthier people travel, they shop, they have the ability, and frankly, also the additional disposable income to be able to spend that
Yeah, and
and
it's key
circulate it.
there, and it's really good that a very compelling concept here from another colleague of mine, Diane Lind, who used to be the editor of Next City magazine, and she recently gone freelance, but she coined this term, the human doom loop, in which people spend more and more time indoors, that mostly fixed to their devices, because into loops and the less opportunities there are to engage outside the home, it triggers that vicious cycle. So less and less, then the more inclined people are to stick with activities indoors.
Yeah, and transparently, they're also more likely to not think about things in a long-term basis. I know that you and I have covered the fact that most of these spaces, we talk about the outcome or the immediate output, which is the existing communities live longer. And now let's talk about the outcomes, because I touched on healthcare, which is a big cost, especially if you're in the United States. The potential tax revenue when it comes to sales, income, property, if more people are living in their homes and it's not being sold and they're not moving away and they're staying with their connected families and community, that stay put model, because it is part of the 9 elements of a blue zone, but it also is a great way to incentivize economic development if more people are staying versus migrating at a certain age. You get more diversity in a demographic for that. And then you just increase the overall fiscal capacity of that area as a whole. And I think part of this, and you and I have talked about ROI for a blue zone pretty extensively, around how we get to that particular number. And, it ranges just from, for healthcare, I think it's, 2 to 3x for every dollar that you invest in a blue zone initiative. Your healthcare costs reduce 2 to 3x um, on every 5-year scale, just from that number alone, not including all the others that often are critical components. And since you and I have been working on this for a while, if someone is inquiring on this, especially on the technology side, what's the best place to go? Is it you? Is it going through develop strategy lab between you and I? Like, where's the initial inkling
It
that we
would
should
really be a
probably go
best
through?
best would be a joint strategy lab here, and fundamentally it rests on something that has been quite validated, and would like to throw out that again, it's been even more extensive since, but 5 years ago, when I was looking into the European Social Fund Plus, which was their second iteration, and this was pre-COVID, so it was still a smaller iteration than what's become now, that by spending on issues around social determinants of health and all these matters, these themes, that by spending that point, like 0.6% of the whole European Union's GDP on that, after the 5-year program period, expect a lift of 1.5 to 2.5% year on year. So if you take it over the upcoming 20 years, you're already looking at a 20 to 40 times overall return on that amount of public investment. So it's really making the case to the public sector at all levels that this is actually a very high returning opportunity as
Mhm.
far as the public treasury is concerned.
Yeah. So one of the things that you and I are launching next week is the blueprint for blue zones that we've co-written, the white paper that really talks about not only the concept, the human behavior elements, how sustainability and climate-based technologies really impact that, So for those of you that are interested, that might also be a great reference point because we do a lot of detailed work around the financial ROI, the economic ROI, and the social ROI that can be embedded. And the beauty about those is those metrics are pretty universal. The percentages may slightly shift between region because, maybe healthcare costs are a little bit more in the US, but cost of living is higher in a particular European city or what have you. So they all shift relatively quickly, slightly, but they're all in the same direction. So I think that might be a really good reference point. So we'll link it at the end of this session for everyone to have access to as well.
Yes, and that's particularly salient given that the truth is cost of living. Honestly, at this point in the US, it's significantly higher, even for basics like groceries and such, compared to most of Europe these days. Like for anyone who's gone between those two places, it's starkly different. So yes, you are dealing with different institutions, like how the service industries in the States haven't really been as proactive about productivity as those in Europe, especially Northern Europe.
Hmm.
But even with those in mind, you would still see similar magnitude of benefits and potentially even greater if you're starting from an inferior base situation.
Yeah, if you're kind of below the curve, I think that's a really good point. And then additionally, because US cities are actually falling behind on other major cities, tier one, tier two, and tier three, compared to that model of it, we are starting to see a higher competition rate between US and other cities. It used to be, if someone was migrating south, for example, the competition was maybe Jacksonville or Orlando, and now it's potentially, or those two cities are not even on the list of it. They're looking at, Lisbon and Barcelona and some of these other places because of the globalization factor that we're increasing. So I think it's even starting to become a bit more of a global competitive environment of where populations are going to migrate, depending on their particular needs and the type of lifestyle they want to live.
Yeah, and this would be mainly at the significant margins, since usually those who do consider migrating those places, they do tend to be disproportionately at the top in terms of skill sets and earning potentials. So, in fact, and you see this pretty much anywhere, that even within countries, that the places that tend to have a greater concentration, that they do tend to perform better economically speaking. So it's really, if you're able to, well, it's not even about attracting, even retaining these individuals, so
Mhm.
such that they have the option of staying in place as opposed to having to migrate, that's going to be a big benefit to your community.
Exactly. I think that to your point, specifically on that, higher skill level, because the migration process is quite extensive and has a very particular vetting process. Only the ones that do make it to that expatriate kind of label in that new country are very highly skilled. And now you have a population that doesn't have the skill set and maybe doesn't have the resources to develop that skill set. It's that vicious loop again, because now we're kind of working with only the limited resources offered, whereas an influx in these will go in, which leads us to the next topic point that we're gonna showcase, which is all around creating these economic incubators and these distinct districts for economic prosperity that we'll talk about next.
Excellent.
All right, great talking to you, Yangbo.